All right, Meg, one of the things that comes up a lot with advisors, clients, centers around responding to the market, right? And
Oh,
let's be clear, I think like good and bad, right? Like, I
sure.
think, how do we help clients, coach clients? Like, as an advisor, like, how do I, kind of respond to, the emotional side here around like the market volatility, like changes, good and or bad. One of the things I think that comes up for both of us probably is more on the how do we respond if markets like aren't going well? Like what do we say, like what do we say to our clients? So kick us off here. What are some of just your initial like go-tos when it comes to coaching advisors on how to respond when markets aren't going so great?
Yeah, one thing that I like to start with, because what I hear a lot of advisors do, I've talked to a lot of advisors about what they do. The client calls, they're like, "I'm really nervous. I want to get out of the market," and the advisor's like, "Hey, I understand that it's scary." A lot of advisors do actually some good empathetic work up front. They say, like, "I know that it's really scary." And then they say something like, "But hey, we've planned for this," or your portfolio, can handle this, or markets do go up and down, but over the long haul, things are always going back up. We use empathy, but then we use empathy to then kind of like begin giving advice, and all advisors know what happens next is the client will say, well, this time it's different, or you just don't understand, or sometimes the client honestly will say nothing, because they now feel shame and they feel uncomfortable with the fact that they just called because they feel bad about it, that maybe they shouldn't have. And none of those things, are what we want. And so, instead, the client can call. You can say, yes, things are really hard right now. Would it be okay, if I ask you a few questions? I understand that the markets are going crazy. I want to make sure that what we're talking about really matters to you today. Would it be all right if I started with a question or two? So this one, as the advisor, I think it helps to create some space. You don't automatically have to go to advice, and you've demonstrated to the client that you're not just going to go to advice. You're creating a little bit of space in that you just want to talk to them. So I like to start there. Is there something that you start with or that you prefer people do?
Yeah, I guess, one of the things, so some of this is like subjective and in terms of when a client is expressing like kind of some level of worry. And so, worry for me or intensity is probably different than for you than from, Joe Schmo or what have you. And so I like one of the things that I kind of like to try and do is first is like get a sense of like where are we from an intensity standpoint, not just using words. And so like I kind of go to like scaling questions like, okay, hey, like tell me like scale 1 to 10, 10 being, like losing your mind, like super worried, can't sleep, like difficulty, like functioning, one being like, you're cool as a cucumber. Like, where do you fall, like right now, kind of on this scale? And so I like to do that because it's helpful, I guess, just knowing like kind of where then kind of do we go. And so, if clients, at least my kind of thinking here is like if clients are falling in kind of like the 8 to 10 like range, it's like, okay, the level of work or my response, like where we need to go might be different than if they're, kind of 5-ish to like 7 or like, or what have you. So, like, I guess for me, sometimes like the starting place that I need is like, I need to get a sense of like where you are, not just from a words, but like intensity place, and scaling questions, I think are the like easiest way for me to do that. So, I'll start there and then just kind of again, like depending upon where we're falling, like my responses, or the I guess kind of path there then, might vary or might be different.
I really like that though. I had not thought to do that, but I like it because it doesn't assume. I guess a lot of times when I think about advisors and the way that they describe it, it's like the client calling is freaking out. But I guess sometimes, I mean, in reality, I've called my advisor about something, not freaking out. I knew what was going on. And so perhaps, assuming that if they're calling, they're at a 10 is a really bad assumption. And so to your point about asking, hey, meet him with an empathetic statement. Yes, things are going on right now. It's kind of scary out there. Scale of 1 to 10, like how scary does that feel to you? That would be sort of like my first question to you, like what's on your mind. If you didn't say it like that, like I think even another way, I kind of think that just the scaling questions could offer another way to do a little bit of grounding,
Hmm.
which is sort of how I move through that. I ask permission, and then one of the first questions I ask about is related to grounding. Like when you think about your finances today, what's the emotion that comes up? If you had to put one word to how you were feeling today, what would it be? What has your attention right now, believe it or not, financially or otherwise, because sometimes people obviously see what's going on in the market, but they are concerned about their family,
Yeah.
and so it's like, let's know what we're dealing with. But I really do like the scaling one. Um, yeah, that's
I
good.
was gonna say, like, I think where I had, and this is maybe from like kind of some of like the clinical side too, is I'll say this, and it may not sound so great here, but I think, look, sometimes we think clients can be dramatic, or if it's like, okay, well, this client always freaks out about something, like they're always worried about something, they're just more like highly like anxious. It can be easy, I think, to dismiss the freak out, or even like the seriousness around what they're wanting to do. And so I think the value, at least, of a scaling question, and not just this time, but kind of like in general, is like, okay, well, usually when they have called, they've said that they're worried, but that worry has been like a 6. Oh, actually, this time we're at a 9. That's actually okay. Like, that's actually a big, like, that's a big difference. So, okay, maybe the 6s I've not taken, like, I've just kind of, oh, okay, all right. But the 9, like, all right, I need to pay a little bit more attention. Like, I need to do a little bit more, kind of work or finding out some here too. So I think, like, just kind of in general, using that, because clients, we're guilty, all of us are guilty of just using words that maybe don't quite accurately capture the like intensity, right? Just kind of
Yeah.
whatever it is that we're feeling. And so I think just kind of in general, like using scaling questions from like time to time can just be helpful in giving you a better maybe picture of the client's experience.
Yeah, I like that too. I do. Again, I like we're not assuming, and then two, yeah, like there are probably, like, I'm a high anxiety person, um,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that I always sound a little like uppity when I'm calling my advisor. But in my own scale of anxiety, I don't know that I've ever been above like a 7 or an 8, but probably if you ask my advisor, he's probably like, oh yeah, she's at a 10
Freaks out
constantly.
all the time. Freaks out all the time.
Freaks out all
Yeah.
the time. Daniel's probably like, oh God, her again. But like, but it had, had he asked me that, maybe he would know that, yeah, there's something I want to talk about, but maybe, it's not the end of the world. Another question that I think is good, or can be helpful, is to kind of to get into meaning a little bit. We
Mm.
sort of ask that with like, what are you worried about, something financially or otherwise, so you're beginning to kind of get at that. But even asking, like, what are you trying to protect most, or how does today's fear, connect, like when you think about how you feel right now and your long-term goals, like what is the relationship there? You'd be surprised, like what people will say,
Mm. Yeah.
sometimes, especially if they've been a client for a long time. I may know that I have a well-balanced portfolio, that you're gonna, work with me through the pivots, that, if I needed to make a dramatic change, you would tell me. Maybe I know all of that. And so I may actually say, look, I know that my long term, is protected, but this just feels like not awesome right now. And and again, then if I'm the advisor and I hear that, even though we can't take away someone's pain, like we can't take away someone's grief, we know that we don't need to tell them that their portfolio is okay. We know that we don't need to explain volatility and standard deviation. We can just say, like, they already know that they're going to be okay. And they're just telling us that right now, feels really awful. And
Yeah.
so if they say that, then it's like, well, what do you want to talk? Like, like, let's talk about that. Like, what, maybe we can spend less time on TV, or how about we get you just like out of the house? Or, do you want meat for lunch? Like,
Hmm.
people sometimes just need to feel connected, need
Yeah.
to feel like they can pick up the phone and call, even though they probably know you can't do anything. And maybe they don't even want you to do anything besides answer the phone and say, yes, it's,
Yeah.
this is not awesome. This is not fun. I'm glad that you called.
Yeah,
Um,
that reassurance piece, whether clients say it or not, like I do think that there's an element of like that's what they're looking for from you is just knowing like I've got someone that can just reassure and like kind of soothe, right? Soothe
mhm.
me in that sense. And so not underestimating like the value that just that alone, like what that can do. And sometimes that is, sometimes it is enough. Kind of there. It's not necessarily that you need to do anything. I guess maybe the last thing that I would say that when I was listening to you, that it reminded me, let's just say reassurance. We need to do a little bit more than reassurance, right? Like the idea of kind of breaking down a decision, maybe like into micro steps, kind of
Yep.
came up for me, right? Like, hey, okay, I hear that you want to move everything to cash and move to Canada. Like, okay, I'm hearing, right, and you're at a level like 9. Okay, right? Like, you know, can we maybe commit to like the next 2 weeks just gathering information, right? Like, can we just commit to that for 2 weeks and then maybe like check in and let's just see where you are for that? Like, sometimes those micro steps and like breaking down, like, maybe not that you agree with the decision, but like if we can just like kind of break it down enough and then put in some markers for like period, like when are we going to reevaluate? Like, sometimes like you'd be surprised, like clients might come back in 2 weeks and be like, yeah, hey, that was a really stupid idea. Like, I'm not moving to Canada. Like, uh, you know, Canada's cool and all, but, you know,
I
I think
like
I'm
my
gonna
house
stay here.
in
I like my
Ohio.
house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I totally agree that, well, one, it's their money, so we can
So
talk
true.
them through their decisions, but at the end of the day, if they
So
are
true.
going to Canada, they're going to Canada. Um, and I also really liked that, again, we're using space. We're saying, okay, I understand. This is really important. Canada's cool. I've heard Quebec is nice, like let's do some work over the next 2 weeks to just figure out like how we would even do this. Like, what would this cost? And so you're not saying no, but you are definitely cashing out of their portfolio. Like, you're kicking that down the road a little bit. Um, another way to approach that is like, how much do you need to feel safe?
Mm.
That like if they say, I just need $10,000. Well, if they have a $2 million portfolio, you go right ahead and give them that $10 million or $10,000 and don't worry about it. You can always ask, how much do you need and for how long? How long do you want this extra security? And people may say, I don't know, 6 months, 1 year. That again, they may still be, if they're at a 9, they may still be pretty upset. I haven't thought about that. This just feels really scary. And they say, well, let's do think about it. Let's have you come in next week. We can play out some different scenarios. You can also say, I would also like, as a part of this scenario, that we talk about when to put it back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
That there's the process of getting out and then there's the process of getting back in. And we should probably
Mm.
talk about both. Um, a lot of times when you can slow down the decision making process, which you can, understanding is not agreement. You can understand that they want to go to Canada. You can understand that they,
Yes.
want this plan. You don't have to say, "Yes, let's do it all today." You can you can go along with this process and allow them to think through all the steps, and slowing their brain down and helping them to think through all the steps. You may find that they will talk themselves out of those steps, or that once things calm down a little bit and the news cycle, goes to something else, they will feel a little bit better. But then certainly you haven't necessarily talked them off the cliff, but you said, "Hey, let's take the long way around," and that that does a lot. It still keeps you on the same side of the table with them, which is super important. You don't want it to be like, we're just going to
Yeah.
fight about this. Um, and it also just, is good decision making, like a good at slowing down the decision, being a decision partner, working to understand, not necessarily to agree. Those are all really important things to remember, to think about, to consider. um, I like asking, like, is there something specific that you're thinking about doing? Can we walk through that? Could there be more than one way to feel comfortable? What would that look like? Just getting them, because when people are freaking out, they narrow the focus, get
Yeah.
rid of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
pain, get rid of the fear.
Yep.
And because you are perhaps not as scared, you can help them to sort of broaden that perspective, talk about different possibilities, talk about different probabilities, talk about different ways to solve for the same thing, which is, again, not saying no, but slowing down the process.
Yeah, I think to kind of I like that you kind of mentioned that, and what it, to kind of some takeaway, like kind of summary here, because there's been a lot of good things
Of
that
course.
have been said. I think, right? I think there's been
Yeah, yeah.
a few good
And I think
nuggets.
before you say this, I so the thing that advisors always want to be able to do in this meeting is to give advice. That is your job. Those things are super important. And if you go about this sort of process in the way that we've talked about it, where we're talking about, okay, let's hear what you want to do. Like, this is the point in which you say, gosh, I could map that out. I could run a Monte Carlo analysis. I could look at your cash flow. I could, like, would that be okay if I give some advice on that? Very different. Like, now we have a really specific thing where we can offer expertise,
Mm,
to
yeah.
show them, which is really different than just like, well, markets go up and markets go down, and here's my chart that says that, like that. You you do want to give advice at some point, that is your job, but it's more of not just giving advice, but guiding. And if we're trying to learn what they're scared about, what's going on, what is it that they think that they need to plan for, and then we say, would it be okay if we went over, some charts and some numbers and things like that related, to this idea, that is the time to give the advice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And to piggyback, I guess, kind of on that, and we've kind of said that, I think it is also okay to just explicitly say, I'm hearing, all of these things. I'm hearing like this is where you are. Would it be helpful? Would it be helpful if I offered some suggestions,
Yeah.
advice, or would it be more helpful to just kind of talk through like how you're feeling? I mean, even just acknowledge, right? Just kind of putting that out there. And if it's like, yeah, no, I would actually like some feedback. I'd like to know your opinions. Cool, great,
Yeah.
awesome. Now then, right? Like that opens the door where you get to shine and give all of your, brilliance, right? There. So a few kind of takeaways here. One, you know, being able to kind of assess, I think, where a client is accurate, more accurate, right? Like, let's not assume, right? Not assuming that what they mean by language or like presentation, right? Maybe using some scaling questions there, or just diving in a little bit more, right? And kind of distilling and finding out more information or what's behind it, right? What else are you worried about? What else is kind of going on? What's behind some of this is great to kind of have in your pocket. um, breaking kind of things down maybe a little bit further, being able to ask, you know, hey, would it be helpful if I gave advice? Would showing you the numbers be helpful in this, right? There's a lot of different kind of approaches here. I don't think that there, is a right way. It's very much like in the moment, kind of what does the client maybe need, what's going on. But there's a few different ways of kind of operating in response to if clients are calling freaking out around, things like market volatility or even any other thing. Like maybe it's freaking out about something else that has nothing to do with markets there.
Right.
But I especially like the point that you made around can we also create a plan for pulling money out, putting money back in, right?
Mhm.
So I do really like and want to highlight that I think that that is important, and hopefully those are points or conversations that you are having. All right, Meg. Anything else around like just thoughts or nuggets around responses to volatility, markets, things like that that you think advisors should know?
Well, I think we both started with some way to create some space because it is hard when they call to resist that urge to give advice. And so whether it's asking for permission, whether it's saying, "Hey, I understand," like meeting them with empathy and then saying, "Let me ask you a few questions about what's going on," then now you've created that buffer of and you've told the client like sort of set some expectations that I'm going to ask you some questions about what's happening and how you're feeling and what you're thinking about. Okay, then once we've done that and kind of assessed the situation, instead of just guessing, we're talking about getting the actual feelings about, what they're going through. Then from there, yeah, making the point of trying to understand their plan through asking about the plan, offering up, your advice, always with for advisors, if you're going to be taking the money out, what are we going to put the money back in? And then, probably something that we haven't talked about, but to close out a meeting like that, you can always talk about next steps, thank them for calling you. That's a
Mm,
really big one that I sometimes think gets overlooked in these meetings that, advisor or clients, I know every advisor has had this experience where the client calls and actually apologizes. Hey, Ash, I know you're busy. I know you got a lot going on. I'm really sorry. I
mm,
need to ask you a question. And it's like, why are you sorry? Like, this is your money and
yeah,
that's my job,
yeah.
and all the advisors feel that. They all think, why is this person? But in this moment, you want to thank them. Like, I'm so glad that you called. That is exactly what I would have wanted you to do. And I'm excited or interested, in our plan and what we've laid out, and here's what we're going to do next. I think that can be very, very grounding. It's very respectful. It's professional, but keeps that line of communication and connection open. That we want them to tell us when they're uncomfortable or that something has happened. We want them to feel that we respect and appreciate, their vulnerability, in this moment. And that can be a nice thing to just sort of end with that you're grateful that they called and whatever steps that you're going to take the next ones together.
Yeah, yeah, I love all that. I'm glad. I think that you're right. Being able to thank them is so important. It teaches them how you want them to engage with you, right? What you're there for, right? All of that. So yes, I'm so glad that you mentioned that last part there. Well, thank you to all of you for listening in. We hope that this was helpful. Yeah, we hope this is helpful and look forward to diving back into other topics, other questions, other themes that show up. So, to everyone out there, cheers.
Cheers.